So thank you for joining us this morning. I think talking amongst ourselves before this, Tyler and I know that we've gone back to school most school years and wanted to be a little more prepared than we were, right? So you leave this school year with all of these ideas of what we're going to be doing and what we should have done better. And, I bring my files home, and then it's the end of July and that August feeling of Sunday night every day comes. And Tyler and I both know that we can't do this without support and community, and just having people telling us a bit of what to do and being accountable with it. So that's why I wanted to put this together today, just to have everyone start thinking August is coming, whether we want to like that or not, and how can we use that effectively. So what we're going to cover today is preparing for the first week. Then we're going to look at language, focus, and being curriculum ready. And the quote that comes to mind with all of this for me is Leonard Bernstein when he says, "To achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time," right? Because procrastination is my frenemy. I can relax a lot, but then the anxiety dreams come when I'm not getting ready fast enough. So that is our thought for today. And then these memes that we see out there with, the teacher in September, right? We go back and we're all excited and have these great ideas. And I love that it used to say teachers in June feel like these disheveled pictures. But for me, it was always mid-September when I realized, I should have. And the district has all these new initiatives as well that I need to add on to what I want to be doing. So we want to avoid that feeling. And that's what we're going to try to do today. So who are we and why are we doing this? I'm Mary DeSimone, and I own Mountaintop Education Consulting. I've been, or had been, in public schools for 20 years. So I was an ESL teacher, an instructional coach for ELs, and then a district administrator. And I left last year when I realized that I couldn't support teachers how I wanted to from within the district. I thought by going up to administration, I'd be able to do a lot more for the teachers. But it wasn't what I wanted. And what I really want to do is help teachers feel comfortable and confident through the year. So that is why I am doing this now. And Tyler is doing it with me this morning.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And I'm Tyler Ramey, and I own an Out This Ed Education Consulting. And I actually have a very similar background to Mary. I've also been a teacher, instructional coach, district administrator. I'm also adjunct professor for UMass Dartmouth, and I've been in the field for almost 20 years. And very similarly to Mary, I have felt like the roles that I've been in the school system, especially most recently as an administrator, I was not able to do the things that I know were needed in terms of supporting teachers, all teachers, not even just ESL teachers, but buildings as well. So that's why I've come over to this field to be able to do that. So why is this important? So as we said earlier, we want to be able to enjoy the rest of the summer. And when you start seeing those back to school signs everywhere in the stores, on TV, on social media, if you're like me, you probably get a little bit of like a nauseous feeling in your stomach thinking about it. And we always have the best intentions at the end of the school year. Or for me, it was always kind of in the spring, not necessarily the last month of school. But in the spring, I always thought, this is what I'm going to do next year. I'm going to start my year like this. I'm going to be organized like this. I'm going to make sure I do X, Y, and Z. And as you could tell in the picture I had on the last slide, I really enjoy sun and summer and water and being able to relax. So as a procrastinator, I never really did those things before it was time to go back. So our hope here is that we're going to be able to help guide you through this, and knowing the things that maybe were missteps for us in the past, or the support we've given to teachers in the past, that have the things we've done that have helped those teachers to be successful. That's why we think that this is very important. So what is your role? You can go ahead and just add it in the chat for us. There's so many different positions that come along with being an ESL teacher. We have self-contained classrooms, co-teaching, push in, pull out, and a lot of those things mean different things in different schools and different districts. So we want to think about this in terms of what does that mean for conversations that you need to think about having with other teachers that you're working with your administrators, and any other important stakeholders that there might be. So if you're a co-teacher, that requires a completely different level of preparation and co-planning than if you are a self-contained teacher, right? So thinking about what your role is, and some people have multiple roles, right? You might be pushing into one classroom, but pulling out in another classroom, or even a different grade level. So we just kind of want to think about, what does this mean for you in your preparation for the school year? What are the conversations that you need to have? Who do you need to have them with? And what are those responsibilities and expectations?
So who, if you don't want to put it in the chat, tell us out loud, what are your grade levels and or your role in ESL? So Michelle, hi, I see that you joined. Are you still doing elementary, both push in and pull out?
Yes, I'll be doing both push in and pull out.
What
I'll be
grades are you?
starting in a new district, so I don't know the grades yet, but I was told, yes, I was told I'll be teaching newcomers this year, which I'm very excited about.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh.
K through 5
favorite.
elementary.
Okay. That's Tyler's favorite. She's got good stuff on newcomers.
Awesome.
Kimberly, what grades were you with before you?
I was working with fourth, and I had co-teacher.
Oh, okay. Nice. And Susan, what are you with?
I used to do developing in high school,
Oh,
mostly ninth grade. But with newcomers and SLIFE, this year I'm doing newcomers and SLIFE. So I could ninth grade newcomers, but they could be anywhere from 14 to 18 years old, you know, in there.
yeah, so you have the
class.
variety.
Yeah, so
Okay.
yeah, it's big variety.
Yeah. Regina, what grades did you do?
Kind of a variety. I've taught, I guess, like self-contained Ls in a summer school setting, which was middle and high school.
Hmm.
In my regular classes, I mostly get exited Ls, and plus I work in a district where most of our kids speak a different language at home.
Mm. Yeah, so that makes sense because a lot of this prep, like we're talking about for L teachers, but you're gonna see so much of the crossover in here as well. Whether they're exited, they still need the supports. And Tanika, what grades were you in?
So I mainly service high school.
Your high school.
And in my experience has been a little bit of co-teaching and a little bit of push-in as well.
Okay, nice. Thanks for sharing.
Yes.
We've got a good variety here.
Yeah.
So these requirements are from the Massachusetts guidance. So if you're in a different state, it may look similar to this, but essentially we know that the instruction of Ls, English learners, MLLs, whatever acronym we're using in whatever part of the country, we have to provide them meaningful access to the curriculum. And so that happens in the general education classroom, and it also happens in the ESL classroom. And something that's important to know here is that when we say ESL instruction, that means we're talking explicit direct instruction to promote English language development. And sometimes that is one of the conversations that needs to be had with administration or with building level coaches or with co-teachers. And we're going to talk in a second about what ESL is not and should not be. But we just want to remind ourselves that this is really what our job is. Our job is to develop the language proficiency of our English learners. And we oftentimes have some teachers or administrators that think that ESL might be something a little bit different. So this is just a list of things that is not ESL, right? We're not an academic support class. We're not taking their current curriculum work and just helping them through it. It's not special education services. It is most definitely not an intervention. So if you have a student that is being brought up for an IEP and they want to talk about what interventions are in place, ESL is not an intervention. It's not extra help, homework help. You're not tutoring. You're not walking around the room and just pointing to things. And so thinking about, does this happen to you in your space? Is this something that is expected? Is this something that your building leaders are thinking, oh, this is your job, you're just going to give them extra support in their core instruction? Well, you are going to give them some support, but it's the language development piece. So we just want to keep that in the forefront of our mind when we are considering who we need to talk to and what kinds of conversations we want to have. Depending on what your specific role is, there are key routines that you want to have, right? In the elementary school classroom, we always have some kind of morning routine where students are coming in, maybe putting their backpack away, getting their lunchbox out. So just considering what kinds of routines you may need throughout the day and what that means for your specific role. So if you're a co-teacher, that means that you're going to have to work together with the other person in your classroom to determine what are those things that we have in place. How are the kids asking for help? How are they asking to go to the bathroom? What is the routine for transition from one subject to another subject? If you are a pull-out teacher, again, different routines that you may need to have in your space that's going to help take some of that cognitive lift off of your students so that it's kind of just memorized. They know exactly what to do at that time of day.
So Tyler, if I can say too, a lot of this is going to be good for regular education teachers.
Absolutely.
Right. And like you said, we're really thinking of the language piece of it. And there's a quote, I don't know if anyone on LinkedIn follows Elevation Ed, but they put up great things. So if you don't, start following them. But the quote they had this past Saturday that I put in here because it really applied was, the only way to learn a language is through communication. And that communication will not happen without a culture of respect and collaboration in the classroom. So when we invest time into teaching kids how to work in pairs, work in groups, to praise one another, how to take turns, we're actually investing time in the right things, right? And that's Natalia Heckman. And I think sometimes we get worried that we're not jumping into academics and just those academic routines right away. But we want to look at this with a language focus as well.
So some of the routines that you may be interested in are listed here. I mean, you can have a routine. I tell my teachers, have a routine for absolutely everything that you're doing throughout the day. It is a lot of work up front, but it makes things run so much smoother throughout the year. So you don't have to keep reminding kids and give them instructions for everything. And they don't have to think about how to understand. They just do it. So we also have a couple of throughout the day routines and academic routines here. So you may already have some of these in place, and some of these listed here might be some ideas for what you want to move towards.
And it might be, I clicked ahead too fast, but it might also be if they're learning these routines in the mainstream classroom, what's the language demand of them? And if you're co-teaching, how can you work with that? And rather than doing it on the spot, having it ahead of time is just really helpful. So building community is the other thing that we want to have settled within the first few weeks and then continuously throughout the year. So the question really becomes like, how do you make an environment welcoming for your students? So considering the cultural differences, of the kids that you have. So having SLIFE students, for example, who haven't been to school for a while or at all, how are they comfortable in such a strict environment, right? Part of it goes back to setting those rules and knowing that they don't know these rules, so we're not going to reprimand them for it. We're just going to reteach it. How are we going to lower the affective filter of our students? What are some ways that you're going to make people feel really comfortable in class? Do you have your growth mindset posters up? Do you have those things ready? And what activities are you going to do in those first few weeks? There's so many listed on the internet. You're all experienced teachers, right? So I'm going to ask you in a minute to share something that you've done that has worked really well. But first, I'm going to share one that one of our teachers did, which was have each student create the flag for their country. They have their personal picture on it. They have their flag up, and those just go around the room. And it's something that's really easy because whenever a new student joins, their flag with their picture gets put up. And then they can see people from similar countries, similar language backgrounds. And it's just that they're seen now in the classroom. It's the first step, at least, to being seen. So I'd like you to share, maybe two people share, what's something that you've done that you found really successful for welcoming your L's into the classroom, whether it's an activity or anything else that has helped.
I can go first.
Thanks, Kimberly.
I really enjoy sharing our names. We create our little, like a 4-box little activity. They put their name in there. They could decorate however they want, their favorite food, their favorite color, and just something like an activity they like to do. So, that's always something easy that everybody can do, whatever language they have, or, so, and as we come through, they can always go back and see each other's names, and then, oh, hey, I like that too, or whatever, and the food, because they're coming from different backgrounds, it's always something different. So that's really neat.
Yeah. So you hit on something that's so key there, right? The names, the correct pronunciation of the names is one part of it. But also I've been a month or two into this school year and realized that my students didn't know each other's names. When I've done pull out ESL, they're coming from different classrooms. And I realized, oh my gosh, I didn't spend enough time in September building that piece for them. So names it's a good one. Let's see, Michelle says, this past year, I've had my 2nd and 3rd and 4th grade students share the language they speak at home, the country their family is from, and it created a strong sense of community as they realized what they have in common. Yeah, Michelle, right? Like just the commonality, no matter how different we are in different ways, there's that commonality between us. And that's really what building community is about. The other thing I want to think about as we go back into school, pre-assessment, right? We're definitely not going by last year's state assessment. So up here in Massachusetts, we follow WIDA. So we have the access test, which is done in January, February. That data is pretty much out of date. So how can you effectively use what you're doing those first few weeks to capture data, to capture how are they listening, how are they speaking, right? So think of the 4 domains, but also think of the 3 dimensions, their vocabulary, their sentence structure, their discourse structure. You might want to look at the can-do name charts. Tyler, can you put that in the chat?
Sure.
Do you have it there? If you're not familiar with them, it's a really great way just to quickly collect data. But what I want to point out is pre-assessment doesn't have to be separate from the time you're taking to set routines or build community, right? You can have a piece of paper, some notes in front of you, and as you're discussing with students, you're writing down how they're doing, how's the vocabulary on the topic, what might they need work on. So you got to be pretty clear on your teaching, which is where all this pre-planning comes in. Your students have to be used to you just walking around taking notes. I would usually have a clipboard with me or an iPad with me, and it became nothing. because they were just so used to me having something like that. You can work with your content teachers. So if you want a writing sample, the ELA teacher is most likely doing something the first few weeks to get a writing sample as well. So you can use that, or you can share yours with the ELA teacher as well, right? And that's going to help you gather really quick data to create the L support plans and to decide what supports you need in the classroom.
I
This
think it's
and more-
also,
Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say, I think it's also important to remember that you don't have to create something special for this. You can leverage the things that you're already doing. A lot of teachers will ask, like, well, when am I supposed to do this? It takes a whole week to do access. It doesn't have to be something big and formal like that. It can just be, like we're saying, you can take a writing sample from something they're already doing, something that you're already teaching. So using what you're already doing to collect that data.
Or put them on Flipgrid, have some stations, right? Or whatever recording you're using now. Have some stations as you're doing get to know you activities. And one of them is they have to talk about X, Y, and Z into the computer. Because we also want them to be used to and comfortable speaking into the computer for their state testing, especially for access. I know in Massachusetts, that's one of our lowest scoring areas because our kids just don't get enough practice and aren't comfortable with that.
Okay, so we're going to talk about my favorite thing, which is the focus on language. And I'm just going to touch upon social language, intentional interactions for use of language, and language functions. So social language, a lot of times it's not something that we're thinking about teaching, right? Because it's the informal language. It's the basic interpersonal communication, right? Playground language, they call it sometimes. But if you have students that are lower proficiency levels, those may be things that they still need to have taught to them, right? They might need the language of taking turns. They might need the language of asking for help. Even in the cafeteria, asking for something. So thinking about what kinds of language they might need to use within the first week of school. Does that need to be specifically taught to them? Does it need to be modeled? What kinds of things are going to help to support them the most? Then with intentional interactions, as Mary just said, our speaking scores in Massachusetts are not super great. So something that we need to work on within our classrooms is giving the talking time to the students. So creating those opportunities for students to have those meaningful interactions. Turn and talk, such an easy one. You can set them up in a number of different ways. Give them those visual cues for what it's supposed to be. Of course, anytime we're introducing a new routine, we're modeling. But it's a great way to get them to practice language in a less intense, less pressure, right? In a lower pressure situation. So they have that partner that they probably feel comfortable with. This can be in a whole group setting, small group setting, but thinking about how am I planning this so that my students are going to be able to get the most out of it. Think about how you're setting them up when they're seated in the classroom, in a small group, on the carpet. What is their first language? Do I want them to be with someone who speaks the same first language? Do I intentionally not want them to be seated next to someone who speaks the same language? A lot of considerations for how to do it, but just thinking about as many opportunities as possible for them to use the language. So language functions, these are so critical when we're thinking about developing our students' language. And here you can see on the left, we have a list of language functions. These are things that we're just doing. It's part of all of the standards. It's part of our lessons. So we want to think about what are the most high leverage functions that we should focus on within the first week, 2 weeks of school, right? If you're in a lower level class, a lower grade classroom like kindergarten, first grade, there might be some drawing and labeling. It might just be drawing, but you want to always give them a scaffold and a support to be able to talk about what they're doing, right? Sequencing or retelling is always happening. Retelling a story, telling what they did in the morning, how did they get to school. There's a lot of retelling that happens in every subject area. It goes across grade levels, it goes across subjects. So looking at that list, thinking about knowing what you are doing in your classroom in the first week, which of these are most important for my students to be able to access what we're doing. Now, language forms is something that's a little smaller piece of language, right? It's kind of that grammar. So if I'm retelling something, does that mean that I have to be able to use past tense? Well, for a lot of your students, if they're a lower proficiency level, that's a big lift on them. They may not know how to use past tense verbs yet. So just thinking about what are my activities that I'm using? We talked about those community building activities. What kind of language do they have to use? And how am I going to support them? And on my next slide, you can see that anchor charts and sentence frames are a really nice way to be able to use those language functions and support them. So you can see here, there's comparing and contrasting frames, there's summarizing, and then there's sequencing. So those are for a bunch of different subject areas, but being able to support them with those particular frames, it's going to help them so that they don't have to think about all of the language needed. They're just kind of filling it in.
And I think having, like Tyler said, having those ready beforehand, right? It's that, what can we do now for an hour here and there to get these ready? So thinking of the 4 key uses in WIDA, right? We have narrate, explain, argue, and inform. So how can you leverage those and have something ready that probably will be used throughout the year as an anchor chart, but doing it now rather than doing it in September when everything is coming at you. So that moves us into being curriculum ready, right? So I know that it could either be the content, maybe you're pushing into a content classroom, there's curriculum there, maybe you have an ELD curriculum that you use in your district, or maybe your curriculum, what is that? Because many L teachers don't have any curriculum. We make it up for ourselves, share with our colleagues. So really in that case, think like your units and lessons, what you've made, the themes that you've created through the years and how you're sharing them. But we want to be able to look at that ahead of time, right? So typically what I would do is for my L curriculum, I make sure that's in place, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And for the content I push into, I might specialize on 1 or 2 each year. So one year I might really focus on the math classes I push into, or the ELA, and build that one up. It's hard. It's more than hard, right? If you're pushing into multiple grade levels and multiple content areas, you can't do this for every single one at the same time. So prioritize as you start the school year. You might not know, like Michelle said, you don't quite know what your grade level or what you're pushing into. So as you get going and in the future, just focus on one as you go along and find some cross-curricular, some overlaps, right? But we really want to think like, how do I feel starting the school year? I want to feel confident about this. I want to feel prepared. I don't want to be those last minute, the dreams at night when I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just walking into school and I don't know what to do. We've all been there. And on the other hand, think of your responsibilities as well. So as you're looking at curriculum, you're thinking systematic and explicit language teaching, whether you're push in, pull out, co-teach, self-contained. As the L teacher, that's our biggest job. We also want to make sure that we can support the classroom teachers. We know here in Massachusetts, our classroom teachers have to be endorsed to have L's in their classroom, but we also know that they still need more support in that. And then we have to advocate for our students. So as Tyler was saying, getting ready for some of the conversations you might need to have, preparing for those ahead of time, whether it's with mainstream teachers or SPED teachers or administrators, but really knowing your job and the expectations in being able to clearly say that, to be able to support your students with what they need. So two of our friends in curriculum planning are both WIDA, which for most states, that's where our guidelines are going to come from, but also ChatGPT now is a really good friend. As you go through your curriculum, when you have time in summer planning, this is the time to kind of get familiar with it. So if you already know ChatGPT pretty well, would you give me a thumbs up emoji? I see you, Tyler. And oh, good, Kim, you know it too. And if not, now's the time to kind of play around with it because it can do a lot for you. So what I want to look at first is WIDA in making sure that we're clear with how WIDA and the standards that we have to use are going to relate to our curriculum. No matter what curriculum your district has bought or has not bought, this is what we come back to for everything. So I took an example here from the WIDA standard framework from 2020. This is a 2nd and 3rd grade, the ELD standards for language arts under narrate, right? So we know it's breaking down into narrate, explain, inform, and argue. And when Tyler was talking before about language functions and features, this is where we can go to find some of them. This is what we're going to be focusing on. But we can also, which I'll show you shortly, use some ChatGPT to help us brainstorm. So if you are teaching, you can do this for any grade level. If you're teaching ELA narrate grade 3, right? So maybe you're pushing into the classroom, or maybe you're not. Maybe you just have your polo classroom, but these are 3rd grade students. If we look at what they're required to do in the mainstream classroom, and then we look at the standards that we have as ELD teachers, you're going to see that there's quite a bit of crossover. And this is where we're going to make the biggest impact. So if we can narrate, my thought here was that as kids are coming back to school, we want them to tell us probably about what happened over the summer. You know, we want to get, that's going to be a great pre-assessment, past tense, all different types of sentence structures, and something that they're familiar with speaking about. So let's look at the narrate standards. Let's make sure that we choose something here that we also want to teach, whether it's having them give an opening statement type of thing, or having them describe and use feeling words or other descriptors, or having them use connectors. And I will say almost every time in WIDA, when it talks about connectors, it says first, next, and then. Yeah, I see the eye roll, Tyler. So unless you have newcomers or kindergarteners, it's not going to be on first, next, and then, right? So here we're also going to look into what other words can we use. So looking at that vocabulary level. Now where ChatGPT might be able to help you is looking up what words you might want to use. Now, if you haven't used ChatGPT, be careful with it because it's not always correct. It's a great resource, but without your expertise, it's not going to get you anywhere. So you are the expert as the L teacher. But what you can do, and what I did, was put in some background. I have 2nd and 3rd grade students. We're going to be doing an oral lesson on the summer. And I asked, what are 10 vocabulary words that might be used here? And some of them did not fit for 2nd graders, but some of them did. So I take what I want and put them in here. Then I asked ChatGPT, could you make some sentence starters using these words? And then could you make some sentence examples using these words? So this is all stuff that I used to do on my own and create them and type them up, but it's out there. So this is a time saver that you can do now. And if you geek out like me, 2 hours can go by and I'm still playing on ChatGPT. I had it make pictures for each of these sentences that I could put up. And then my idea is then I would have students use descriptive adjectives about the pictures. But there's just so much it can do. It can do for you, and it can do it really quickly. So I wanted to point that out as you're doing your planning and looking at curriculum. The other thing I asked it about was, what are the grammar structures that I should be focusing on? And it gave me, I think at one point it gave me the subjunctive tense for something. So it, again, not always correct, but it helped me come narrow down some ideas for what I would do at this grade level. So if you have not yet used ChatGPT, you want to copy down this link, which I will actually, Tyler, are you able to put it in the chat?
Sure.
Thank you. And this just has a few quick ways to do it. So you have to create a prompt. You have to tell the ChatGPT who you are, right? So I'm an ESL teacher working with, and describe it. And you're going to want to give more information. We'll get that into that in another session. You want to tell it what the topic is, and then you're going to give it instructions. And it's going to give you a list of here 10 sentence frames or high impact academic words. So if you can match what WIDA is telling us to do for each grade level, for the different domains, you've pre-assessed your students, you have information on what you need to be teaching them in their levels, and then you use ChatGPT to help you come up with some of those things, whether it's these lists I have here, the images, and there's a lot more that it can do for you, but do to you as well, I suppose.
That's coming.
That's coming. That's coming.
AI.
This is a way to speed up that time that you're using to do your planning over the summer.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we think is really important is being able to work smarter, not harder. And if you are a person who is really hesitant to use all of this new AI that's coming out, just explore it, because it sounds really creepy, and you may not really want to get into it because you're unsure about what it is. ChatGPT is really amazing. It really is amazing. So if you just take a little bit of time to explore it, it can help you to get into that working smarter, not harder, and save you a lot of time being able to list out all of those important language pieces that you need.
I would say the same with WIDA as well. So I know WIDA 2020 came out during the pandemic, so school districts didn't really get to implement it the way it was meant to be done, with all the PD and the support for it. And I find a lot of teachers now, it's kind of a booklet on the side that's overwhelming. So that's another thing, taking time to look through your grade level or grade levels and see what it says and becoming familiar with it. It is going to make your life so much easier than grasping for all different types of things to do when you're not quite sure.
So based on everything that we just talked about, we want to know, do you feel like you can implement these things to be prepared for school starting by the end of the summer? You can either come off mute and let us know, or you can put it in the chat, but be honest. Are there certain challenges that you feel would prevent you from being able to do this by the end of the summer? Or do you feel like with those ideas, oh yeah, I can do this. This is going to help me get ready. Yes, Sue says I can do this.
Yes, you can. There you go, Kimberly. Yeah, Susan. So I think it's like, it's overwhelming reading these as they come in. And I know for me, Tyler and I had conversations even as we were preparing this. And we are both thinkers, right? And we're not necessarily doers. So we found it much easier to do this in community. So we set up our times every day to meet, to support this type of thing. And I think that's what it is. There's so much overwhelm, but to do it with someone and to have guidance as you do it is, at least for me, that's how it becomes helpful. So we do have, we're going to run a 3-day challenge for teachers diving into this a bit more, but giving a lot of our expertise on it and what we've used, and just a lot more examples. The idea of the 3 days by the end is that you would come out with your action of what you have to prioritize, what you want to work on for the beginning of the year, and how you're going to sustain it, really. Because I think for me, if I start the school year behind, which I have a few years, I can never catch up. The overwhelm just builds on me. If I start prepared, I have a fighting chance. Right? It still always took me community to keep going forward, but it gives me that chance to work on it. So the teachers that we've worked with this past year, I know Tyler and I have had the opportunity to work with a few. These are some of the things that they've said after working with us for some time. So whether it's, you instill the confidence in my ability I never had before, or one teacher I coached one-on-one said, if I didn't have you this year, I would have quit. And I think she may have, because I think I was part counselor and part L coach. We loved having your guidance. Your well-rounded expertise has shaped the way that I run my classroom for English language learners. And what we want is for you and teachers to feel that they're supported, which in the public school system is often very hard for administrators to give. So we do have to find it outside of the school system sometimes. So we're going to be starting that challenge this week. But we do want to give you, if you're interested in it, we're going to give you half off for our 3-day challenge since you came to our webinar first too. We're also going to throw in the chat now we have a planning checklist that has some of what we talked about now, but a lot more information that you'll be able to prioritize what you are going to focus on working on this year. And you can scan the code here to just get some more information. I think this one brings you to the sign up, actually, if I remember, but you can ask us for more information on it as well. And we can talk to you a bit more about what we're going to do. Tyler, is there anything you wanted to add about that?
No, I just dropped the PDF for the ESL teacher checklist. But you can also reach out to us if you have any other questions about any of that.
Yeah, so we're going to do 2 nights this week. So the 2nd and 3rd, 7 to 8, and then we'll have a little time over the weekend to do some action work. And then we're going to get together again on the 7th as the 3rd day of our challenge to wrap that up. So that is everything that we had. But we'd be happy to take some questions either on what we went over or what you are planning as you go through the rest of the summer, what you want to do. And then, here's our information, because you can always reach out to us and ask questions. So let me leave that one up for a minute, then I'll take it down. So from what we went over, or what's on your mind, and the overwhelm is still there. And I'm going to say it's probably more so because we just put a lot of information in front of you. But if it didn't come now, it would come the week before school. Right. And I think the idea that Tyler and I have had doing this is we would prefer to do a little bit now and then go have fun on the beach. Go do something where we can actually enjoy it. My personality is that I will have anxiety hanging over me until I get something checked off my list.
Yes.
So that's
and the other thing is that depending on which school department you're in, you might only have one actual day before the kids come. And we know that usually those days are filled with meetings. So you're not really getting that time to actually prepare in the way that you might want to. So I also am someone who will have that anxiety hanging over my head. So if I don't have something in place, some kind of plan, I don't really get to enjoy the end of my summer. And I do have that one really, really long Sunday for the month of August.
So what's one priority that you want to have done before, let's say before mid-August?
okay, you're waiting for our responses, right?
Yeah.
I've never done the chat GPT, but I'm really curious about it. So I'm gonna check into that. As far as the anchor charts, I probably won't be back in my school to use to get the sentence frames done, but just a simple thought of do it first and get yourself ready. It has been nice that this is sort of, these tips are short and it isn't too overwhelming, but it is something to start thinking about before it gets really dangerous.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah.
Dangerously close.
Yes, dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a good thing, even if you're not in your school, so you don't have the anchor chart paper, you can have whatever you want on your anchor chart.
Right.
And then you go back in and that, that the weight of the brain and figuring this stuff out, that's not there. It's just the
Right.
physically doing.
Right.
Yeah.
So Kimberly says sentence stems pre-written, which is what Mary was just saying, having those pre-planned, even if it's just in a notebook or on the computer, then you can transfer them. And Michelle's saying getting to know ChatGPT, making and preparing anchor charts and sentence frames ahead of time, and printing out classroom routines. If you are an elementary school teacher, I highly, highly recommend planning those out ahead of time, giving them as much thought as you can beforehand, because it really, I've walked into classrooms before that run themselves, and that's because they had really strong routines in place, and that takes so much off of you as the teacher. So you don't have to worry about redirecting them all the time.
Well, it helps for the high school too, especially with the
Yeah.
newcomers. The newcomers in this life, it's going to be, I'm a little nervous about what it's going to be like, but I think I'm going to have to get those pictures ready.
Yes.
Yeah. ChatGPT will help you with those. I remember I used to spend time searching the web for pictures that would fit into, put all the visuals on the anchor charts.
Yes.
But I was really pleasantly surprised to find I could put in a descriptive sentence and an AI would come up with what I needed.
I didn't realize that it does the pictures as well. I haven't explored that piece yet. That's
Yeah. Once you put on the some extensions into ChatGPT, yeah, it's fun, Tyler.
awesome.
Whoever wants to geek out with us on that, we'll be ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. We would, as always, welcome any feedback, any questions. You have our contact information if you're not following us. We're both on social media. And we'll be putting up some tips there as well as we work to get ready. So it's great seeing you. I hope to catch up with a lot of you soon.
Yes.
Good luck with the new school year. Hopefully we'll see some of you on a challenge and we'll get you ready as part of our team.
And keep your eyes out, because we will have some more things coming up. Whether it's helping you get ready or focusing more on one of those things that we talked about. So keep your eyes peeled.
All right, thanks. So we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Feel free if there's more questions to come up, you can ask us.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Susan.
Bye-bye.